everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for learning. Thanks for hanging in there. We're still in the middle of this COVID plague or pandemic, and this is the perfect time to kind of slow down and try to understand some of the basic outline of end time events. And to me, it is vitally important that we cultivate voices, people who can learn the basics. That's all I'm going to try to get you through is the basics, and then they can build on it and build on it till they get a clear biblical picture of the end times. We can't hang on to just interpreting what's happening in current events. That is not the way that we're supposed to proceed in the end times. We're supposed to know what the scriptures say, and we're supposed to be able to recount that to other people so that there can be some voices of stability in the midst of increasing chaos. That's my goal. And I'm probably not the best person to do it, but I am a person that's going to try. So I greatly appreciate you listening. The instruction I've had from the Lord is to as much a degree as possible, is to start everyone off with the clearly written scriptures. As you know, most people are sort of repelled from end time events by the fact that that they become very involved and very complicated, and there's a lot of symbolism, particularly in the prophetic books of Daniel and early most of it, including Revelation. And people start to look at that. They don't know where to jump in. And when they start, they just become quickly overwhelmed and they just feel shut out of it. Well, the place to start is Matthew 24, and that's what we've done. It's clearly written. If you get that Matthew 24 chronology down, just the way it's listed in the Bible, you are so far ahead of most believers. Now, let me say this. The generations prior to mine did a D- job in equipping my generation according to the scriptures. They pulled out little one-liners like, okay, Jesus is returning. He's going to touch his toe on the Mount of Olives and something's going to happen. Or, there's a rapture at any time, anywhere, in the twinkling of an eye. People are going to be gone, and other people are going to be left behind, and many other things like that. But they never were able to grapple with and incorporate the weightier message and the deeper message on those subjects. And those, particularly in those two cases, those two little one-liners, they do not tell the whole story. Consequently, people like myself spent most of my walk with God believing you live, you die, and you go to heaven. And that's all there is. Nobody told me at that point that there was a 1,000-year millennial reign, the millennium on earth with Christ, where the scripture says that not only will he rule and reign from Jerusalem, but we will rule and reign with him. Beloved, that's my story. That's going to be my destiny. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be doing that with Christ. We're going to be ruling over nations and judging over nations, and that's a story for another day. I hope we'll get there. In the meantime, today what I want to talk about is this issue of the 7 years and the 3.5 years, because it's not enough just to have heard that there's 7 years and then there's a heavy duty 3.5 years. I want to be able to show it to you in scripture. And this is one of the subjects that can become more difficult to really process and learn. But I'm going to give it to you. And like many of the end time events that you're going to study, it's all in hearing it, looking in the Word, listening to some people who know what they're talking about, talk about it, and you just marinate on it. We call it eating the scroll. Marinate in it, and suddenly it begins to take shape in your mind. So let me say this. Daniel, the prophet. No, let me not start with Daniel. I'm going to start with Jeremiah. Jeremiah prophesied to Israel, okay, you guys are going into captivity for 70 years. That's what God has decreed. You're going into captivity for 7 years. 70 years. Don't even bother fighting it. If you fight it, you're going to die. So just go ahead and give up. And when they come to get you from Babylon, you just go right on ahead, because I'm going to restore Israel at the end of that 70 years. And of course, many false prophets came forward saying, oh, no, it's all peace and safety. It's all good. The Lord's going to bless Israel. We're his people. Sound familiar? God wouldn't do anything to his people, even though his people do anything they want to do against God. At any rate, that's what the story was. And the Babylonians came, and they took Israel into captivity, destroyed the temple, and took them away. In that crowd of people that they took away was a young man called Daniel. And Daniel was the Daniel that we know of the book of Daniel. He was the scripture says he has an excellent spirit. Daniel was an excellent model of a Jewish young man. And they took him into captivity. He and several of his friends, they began to rise in favor and in position in the Babylonian Empire. Now, the book of Daniel is a short book. It's only like 12 chapters, but it really spans his life. So he starts off as a young man. I think by the time he passed away, he was probably in his 80s. And during that time, he had several major eschatological visions having to do with the end times. And the Lord gave Daniel the download for the days in which we're living. He gave him the download on the Antichrist and on what was going to be going on in certain nations. Now, in fact, and scholars have proved this, and you can research it, and I advise you to research it. The Jews in Israel did stay in captivity that period of time. I think it actually came out to be like maybe 69 of the 70 years. And so that left this 1 week, and that is referred to as Daniel's 70th year. It said they would go into captivity for 7 weeks. 7 weeks is 7 sets of 7. That's 490, I believe. And because in that, the way that the Bible interprets that is every week was actually 7 years. I think that's accurate. Okay, so that left one remaining 7-year period. And there was a pause. And Israel did go back, and it was restored, and they were buying and selling land. They rebuilt the temple just as Jeremiah had prophesied. Now, so there's this pause. And in this pause, it says at a certain point, Jesus would come, the Messiah would come, and he would be cut off. And so, again, there's all sort of biblical proof that happened in that time frame. And so now we have this post-resurrection period in which Israel was not in the land. They didn't have their own nation. They were just out scattered amongst the world. They went through the Holocaust. Certain terrible things have happened in history. And then they came back together, and they were given their own land again in 1948. And we say that's when the clock started ticking again. However, there is, in the book of Daniel, there's a part where it talks about the 7 years that the Antichrist is on the scene, and he makes an agreement or a covenant or a treaty with these 10 nations, and it seems to include Israel, that he makes this agreement for 7 years. At the middle of that 7 years, he breaks the peace, and that's when he is revealed as the abomination of desolation, and he takes over and tries to destroy Israel and many other nations, and he amasses the whole world against Israel. Now, I'm going to just read some to you about the times, because this is very concise and it makes it easier than me just telling you. So I'm going to read it. Okay, it says, an understanding of Daniel 9:24 through 27 is necessary in order to understand the purpose and time of the tribulation. This passage speaks of 70 weeks which have been declared against your people, that's Israel. Daniel's people are the Jews, the nation of Israel. And Daniel 9:24 speaks of a period of time that God has given to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. God declares that these 77s will fulfill all these things. This is 77s of years, or 490 years. Some translations refer to it as 70 weeks of years. This is confirmed by another part of this passage in Daniel in verses 25 and 26. Daniel is told that the Messiah will be cut off after 7 sevens and 62 sevens, which is 69 in total. So you see, they were there for 69 years, but there's this one remaining 7-year period, beginning with the decree to rebuild Jerusalem. In other words, 69 sevens of years, 483 years, after the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, the Messiah will be cut off. Biblical historians confirm that 483 years passed from the time of the decree to build Jerusalem to the time when Jesus was crucified. It said the Messiah would be cut off. Most Christian scholars, regardless of their view of end-time events, hold to the above understanding of Daniel's 70 years. With 483 years having passed from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem and the cutting off of Messiah, this leaves one 7-year period to be fulfilled in terms of Daniel 9:24, to finish transgression, put an end to sin, atone for wickedness, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up the vision. Okay, this final 7-year period is known as the tribulation period. It's a time when God finishes judging Israel for its sin. Daniel 9:27 gives a few highlights of the 7-year tribulation period. And this is key. This is what we look at to determine when the actual tribulation begins. And God has made it clear that we can know when the tribulation begins. And at that point, we have to be serious about watching and praying. Because once it begins, the Antichrist is on the scene. He's on the scene. He makes this covenant. And this is what it says in Daniel 9:27. He, which is the Antichrist, will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, speaking of 7 years, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on a wing of the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation. You've read this in Matthew 24. Matthew 24 is taking straight from Daniel 9. Okay, on a wing of the temple, he will set up the abomination that causes desolation. That's when he sits down in the temple and declares himself God, until the end that is decreed is poured out upon him. In other words, until he gets what's coming to him. The person of whom this verse speaks is the person Jesus calls the abomination that caused desolation in Matthew 24:15. And he's also called the beast in Revelation 13. Daniel 9:27 says the beast will make a covenant for 7 years, but in the middle of that week, that 7-year period, 3.5 years into the tribulation, hold on. Oh my goodness. He will break the covenant, putting a stop to sacrifices in the temple. Revelation 13 explains that the beast will place an image. This is important. You have not heard this yet. Revelation 13 explains that the beast will place an image of himself in the temple and require the world to worship him. Revelation 13:5 says that this will go on for 42 months, which is 3.5 years. So we are dealing with a 7-year period. The tribulation is 7 years. At the 3.5-year point, halfway in, it's like the first 3.5 years, he's kind of acting like a nice guy, like he's in favor of helping Israel and he's bringing peace and safety and all of that. At the midpoint, you can book it. He breaks his agreement with Israel and he turns full force on them. He hates Israel. Why does the Antichrist hate Israel? Because the Antichrist does consider himself to be God, and Jesus, who is the rightful inheritor and is the Son of God, is returning to Jerusalem in Israel. This is what it's all about. It's not about America. It's about the Jews. It's about Jesus in Israel as a Jewish king, Like I said, on the crucifix, they nailed that little mocking sign, Jesus Christ, King of the Jews. Well, he is coming to fulfill that, that prophecy that they wrote as a joke. Okay, I'm just going to read a little more. Okay, so it says Revelation 13:5 says that the beast will do this for a period of 42 months. It is easy to see that the total length of time is 84 months or 7 years. Also see Daniel 7:25, where it speaks of times, and half a time. Time mean the first time meaning 1 year, times meaning 2 years, and then a half a year. So all total is 3.5 years. Also refers to the Great Tribulation, the last half of the 7-year tribulation period when the beast will be in power. Now, again, I'm just giving you some perspective here. The entire tribulation is for 7 years. When it gets to the middle, the 3.5-year period, when he breaks his covenant with Israel and really the world, certainly with believers, with us, he breaks that covenant. That is when we move into the book of Revelation, where it talks about the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. The last 3.5 years is the time of what's called the Great Tribulation. So mark that down on your little grid. It's the last 3.5 years that really are the difficult years, the super difficult years of the Great Tribulation. So what we're looking for is the temple to be rebuilt. The temple has not been rebuilt yet. For this all to happen, Israel's got to have its temple. We're watching for that. That's what you're watching for right now. You're watching for that. When the temple is rebuilt, then really virtually everything is in place for the Antichrist to come on the scene. The Antichrist is going to take his seat in that temple. Please be aware that that's an up-and-coming issue. Once there is a 10-nation confederation that comes together, 10 nations in association, and this leader rises up and they start giving him their power, that will be the Antichrist. And when he makes a covenant with Israel, it's on. That's when we start our 7-year countdown. And what I'm telling you is widely accepted. This is not like Karen's idea. This is widely accepted. But again, you don't want to, as you explain this to people, and you're going to have to go over it. You're going to have to go over it quite a bit to get where you understand these time dates. But I saw an article. You might want to Google this. It was by John Ankerberg. And if you Google the question, why do you believe Daniel's 70th week is the 7-year tribulation? If you just Google, why do you believe that Daniel's 70th week, Daniel's 70th week is the 7-year tribulation? If you just Google that, there's an article by John Ankerberg, and it's a very good article. I thought he made it very, very clear, and it will help you to understand. You can understand these things. I want you to understand these things, because like I said, it's not good enough to just say, I think that's what somebody told me. No, that's not going to do. You have to know, because the pressure is going to be on when these things happen, and you don't have time then to learn it. You can learn it now. I love you. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.